Every culture has its own stories about angels, demons, spirits, and ghosts. These supernatural beings are in stories from all over the world, and they touch on every subject you can imagine. But when we look at different cultures, there's one that stands out because of how scary and intense it is. I'm talking about the ancient Canaanites. There are a lot of stories, and they all agree on one thing. The Canaanites had some terrifying gods and religious practices. Moloch. Moloch, the bull-headed god from Canaanite culture, stands out in ancient history for his terrifying reputation, especially related to human sacrifices, primarily of children. The name Moloch itself is derived from the Hebrew melech, meaning king, combined with the vowels of boshe, which means shame. This blending of terms reflects the negative connotation associated with this deity in biblical sources. Moloch's practices, particularly child sacrifices, were vehemently condemned in the Bible, with these rites believed to appease the god and bring favor to his worshippers. This practice was particularly abhorrent in the eyes of the biblical writers and was a major reason for divine judgment on the nations that worshipped Moloch. Interestingly, the worship of Moloch might have been related to or even identified with Baal, a prominent deity in the region, and with the Assyrian-Babylonian deity Malek. The word Moloch appears 8 times in the Hebrew Bible, primarily in Leviticus, and in each instance it is associated with child offerings. This prohibition is extended in the books of 1 Kings and Jeremiah, where the worship of Moloch is portrayed as a grave sin. Sometimes Moloch is talked about as if he were a fallen angel, but other times he's just seen as a fake god who had a really bad impact on the people around him. His story is first mentioned in the Bible, in the book of Leviticus, and then again in Kings and Jeremiah. In these stories, he's shown as a god that the Canaanites worshipped, but the Israelites saw him as false and evil. When the Israelites came across Canaan, they were shocked by what they found. A huge statue in the city, looking half like a man and half like a jackal, with a fire burning inside its chest. At first, people offered grain and animals to the statue, but then they started sacrificing their own children, throwing them into the fire. The whole scene was loud and chaotic, with music, chanting, and even the parents praying loudly. The Old Testament has some rules that might seem strange to us, like not getting tattoos or not marrying outside your religion. But if you look into the history of Israel at the time, you realize these rules were probably because their neighbors, like the Canaanites, were involved in some really dark practices. The word Holocaust actually comes from these times, originally meaning a sacrifice completely burned on an altar. These rules weren't necessarily about the acts being evil in themselves, but more about avoiding anything that the Canaanites did, like tattoos or marrying someone who was okay with child sacrifice. This was part of the Bible, in Leviticus, where it talks about Moloch and human sacrifice, saying anyone who sacrifices a child to Moloch should be punished severely. In the Bible, especially in the book of Leviticus, there's a really strong warning against worshiping Moloch and doing human sacrifices. It's said in a very clear way, if anyone in Israel or any foreigner living there sacrifices their child to Moloch, they will be put to death. The community has to stone them. God is super serious about this, saying he will reject anyone who does this because it's like disrespecting his holy place and name. And if people ignore this and don't punish the person who did the sacrifice, God says he'll be against them and their family. This rule is super straightforward. If someone even thinks about sacrificing a child, they're in big trouble, both in this life and after. Even though God is clear about not following Moloch, this god had a big impact on King Solomon's downfall. Solomon was known for his wisdom, given by God. He was King David's son, the guy who beat Goliath and built the first temple. But as Solomon got older, he started to ignore God's warnings. He was influenced by women from other countries who followed different gods, and he even let their religions into his kingdom. Solomon's heart wasn't fully with God like his dad David's was. After Solomon died, his kingdom fell apart, and Israel never saw the good times it had before. John Milton's Paradise Lost also talks about Moloch. It describes him as a terrible king, covered in the blood of human sacrifices and the tears of parents. The noise of music covered the cries of children being sacrificed. Milton writes how Moloch was worshipped in different places and even influenced Solomon to build a temple for him near God's temple. It makes you think how lucky we are that human sacrifice isn't a thing anymore. The world would be a much scarier place if it was still accepted. Asherah. Asherah is a key figure in ancient mythology, known as the goddess of fertility. Her name, Asherah, translates to "she who enriches," hinting at her role in nurturing life and prosperity. What's particularly intriguing about her is the possibility that she might have been married to Yahweh, a concept that seems outlandish considering the strong monotheistic views of the time, as highlighted by the first of the 10 Commandments, "You shall have no other gods before me." But before diving into this controversial aspect, let's get a clearer picture of who Asherah was. Our knowledge about Asherah comes mainly from ancient stone tablets written in Ugaritic, a long-lost Semitic language. These tablets reveal that Asherah was also known by other names like Athirat, Alat, and Asherat. She was thought to be the partner of El, the creator god in Semitic tradition. Before the rise in popularity of the god Baal, El and Asherah were revered as the primary divine pair, symbolizing the ultimate parental figures for all other gods. Asherah's influence extended beyond mere fertility. She was deeply connected to the sea and sanctified places, embodying all aspects of motherhood. Her name was so synonymous with divinity that it was often used to signify a sacred place. She played the role of a caregiver and mediator among the gods, handling their disputes and encouraging peace, much like a nurturing mother would do with her children. However, over time, Asherah's prominence declined. She and her partner El became confused with other deities of the era, like Anat and Astarte. Nevertheless, the Bible clearly differentiates between these entities. In terms of iconography, Asherah was often represented by a simple wooden pole, sometimes surrounded by animals like ibexes, or depicted as an inverted triangle. This triangle is thought by scholars to symbolize female fertility, befitting her role as the fertility goddess. Now, you might wonder why Asherah is sometimes viewed negatively. This stems from the practices of the culture that worshipped her, which included some pretty dark rituals, such as child sacrifice. Worship of Asherah also involved ritualistic sacrifices. Historians and theologians believe that women serving as priestesses for Asherah were expected to perform intimate rituals, including ritual prostitution. It's believed that many women were raised solely for the purpose of serving in these temple rituals, often conducted under what were known as Asherah poles. These poles, sometimes actual trees, symbolized the goddess and were so common that they were often just referred to as Asherahs. Asherah's story is a complex one, intertwining elements of fertility, motherhood, and ancient religious practices. Her portrayal varies from a nurturing mother figure to a deity associated with some of the more controversial aspects of ancient worship. This duality in her character offers a glimpse into the intricate tapestry of ancient religious beliefs and practices, reflecting the multifaceted nature of divinity in early civilizations. Let's dive into the intriguing topic of Asherah's possible connection with Yahweh, the God of the Israelites. This idea comes from some interesting archaeological finds. In the ancient city of Arad, in the Kingdom of Judah, around 9th to 6th century BCE, archaeologists discovered something unusual in a temple: 2 standing stones, one bigger than the other, alongside 2 incense burners. These stones usually represented gods, but the Israelites were supposed to worship only one god. So the question arises, why were there 2 stones? More curious finds have been unearthed across the region, hinting at a possible partner for Yahweh. For instance, in the Sinai region, a jar was found with a Hebrew inscription saying, "Yahweh of Samaria and his Asherah." Another inscription on a tablet read, "Blessed by Uriah by Yahweh, for from his enemies by Yahweh's Asherah he has saved him." These discoveries puzzled many religious scholars. They suggested that Yahweh was thought to have a consort, and the way these blessings were written was quite unusual. But does this mean that God originally had a wife who was later removed from religious texts? Not necessarily. It's more likely that due to similarities between the ancient Israelite religion and the ancient Canaanite religion, some Israelites might have mistaken Asherah, who was the consort of the Canaanite god El, as belonging to Yahweh. El, meaning God or Lord, is also a name used for the Israelite God in the Old Testament, along with Elohim, Asher, and others. This overlap could have led to confusion, making the association between Yahweh and Asherah seem natural, as it mirrored Canaanite beliefs. Another theory suggests that the phrasing Yahweh and his Asherah doesn't refer to a divine wife, but to an object, possibly a wooden pole symbolizing the goddess or a holy place. However, even these explanations leave room for debate. The simplest explanation might be that the Israelites of that era did incorporate polytheistic elements from other religions into their own. This is supported by biblical texts mentioning the downfall of King Solomon due to such practices. Asherah, being highly revered in Canaan, might have been one of the popular deities adopted by the Israelites. Her rituals, possibly involving intimate rites, seem to have been widespread, as feminine figurines were commonly found in Israeli homes of that period. The Bible frequently mentions the Israelites turning to idol worship, and these archaeological findings seem to confirm that. Whether Asherah was considered Yahweh's wife, a fertility goddess, or a deity of prostitution and adultery remains a mystery. Her story is more complex than that of Moloch, another deity from the same era, making her an intriguing and somewhat mysterious figure in ancient religious history. We just scratched the surface of Canaanite gods, and it's been a wild ride. Share your thoughts in the comments, hit like, and don't forget to subscribe for more fascinating dives into ancient myths. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode. Stay curious.